All night, the rain quietly tapped on the cold ground. In the morning, sunlight streamed into the room through the curtains. Outside, there was a rustling and commotion. A flock of birds perched on the windowsill, anticipating their daily feed. Since November, Melissa had been feeding them regularly, mostly with seeds. They quickly got used to it, coming every day for their meal. Spotting Melissa through the window, the birds became animated. One of them even pecked at the window twice, urging her to open it faster since they had arrived for their breakfast. Amused by their antics, Melissa rushed to the kitchen. This time, there were no seeds, so she improvised with slices of bread left over from dinner. The birds approved of this treat, eagerly grabbing pieces from each other. As she watched the birds, Melissa reminisced about her childhood. Back then, she and her younger brother Kevin would prepare a simple treat for themselves from similar pieces of bread. Dampening the bread slightly with water and sprinkling sugar on top created a makeshift pastry that crunched with sweetness. Sweets were a rarity in their home. Occasionally, guests, mostly men who visited their mom, would bring candies or chocolate for the kids. Melissa recalled a time when their spacious apartment, freshly renovated, boasted a beautiful painting above the dresser and a nearly new television sat in the corner. Her mom, exceptionally beautiful with her glossy brown curls cascading over elegant shoulders, wore a stunning white dress with blue flowers that accentuated the blue in her eyes. Among the guests, Uncle Ian stood out to the girl. His kind smile, freckled face, and constant jokes revealed a good-natured person. He was always fixing, dismantling, and assembling something. Thanks to him, there was no broken door or malfunctioning switch in the house. Shelves appeared in the bathroom, and even the old washing machine started working on weekends. Kevin was fascinated by Ian's toolkit with various screwdrivers, power drills, and soldering irons. Ian also demanded their mom's involvement in maintaining the household. He disliked dirty dishes in the kitchen and ensured the kids were fed on time and dressed neatly. The independent woman detested lectures and always referred to him as a nag. She craved lightness and fun every day. Arguments escalated, voices grew louder, and it was evident they wouldn't last long together. Ian's bag and toolbox disappeared from the apartment corridor. When he left, an uneasy atmosphere settled in their family. After Ian's departure, their mom started drinking heavily and spent time with various men. Noisy gatherings often continued late into the night. Sometimes, she didn't spend the night at home, and when she wasn't there at night, Kevin would sneak into Melissa's bed, seeking comfort. She would then tell him bedtime stories. Occasionally, their mom returned to being a regular woman for a few days. Once, she gave a spare key to the neighbor, asking her to occasionally look after the children. She complained about the difficulties in life and their financial struggles. Kelly, the neighbor, a tall brunette with curls, worked as an HR manager at the city's research university. With her help, their mom got a job as a janitor there. Although reluctant to constantly assist the perpetually drinking neighbor, Kelly felt sorry for the children. Unexpectedly, their mom calmed down, and it seemed she finally decided to change her ways. The family welcomed Olivia, a charming girl with big eyes who quickly became the darling of the household. Even the stern neighbor couldn't resist smiling at her during encounters. The child's father was unknown, much like Melissa and Kevin's father. The kids had long stopped asking their mother this irritating question. But despite everything, they loved her dearly. The woman began resembling their tender mother once again, hugging and kissing her children, singing songs, and cooking various treats on weekends. Soon, she grew tired of household chores and started bringing different men home who drank alcohol with her. The newcomers reeked of alcohol and unwashed bodies. Tattoos occasionally peeked out from under their clothes. Now, the children received, at best, indifferent glances and, at worst, endured shouts and lectures. The men now only brought a bottle of alcohol and a small snack when they visited. The older kids took care of Olivia, with Melissa being the most involved. The family struggled financially, forcing the girl to skip school to keep up with everything. However, her intelligence and excellent mind allowed her to maintain good grades. Teenage interests took a back seat, and friends seemed to disappear. The mother seemed to try to calm herself with alcohol or temporarily forget what had happened in her life. She neglected her appearance. Gray hairs showed in her unwashed hair, wrinkles appeared on her face, and her eyes were constantly swollen. She increasingly couldn't make it to work. Melissa, feeling sorry for her, took on her mother's job, cleaning floors to prevent her from being fired. Then, the mother became pregnant again and openly admitted that she decided to have the child only for the benefits. It felt like her desire had finally come true, and she managed to forget all her emotions and memories, leaving only indifference. Indifference to everything and everyone. Every day, she sat on a bench in the yard with a plastic bottle of cheap beer, staring into space for hours. Melissa had to work more often in place of her mother. It was challenging for the girl to study, work, and take care of her younger siblings. Fortunately, Kevin could handle some household duties, and when his sister wasn't home, he could prepare lunch. It was usually overcooked pasta or sticky porridge, but the older sister always praised the 12-year-old boy for his help. By then, Olivia was almost 6 years old. On that day, Melissa returned from school and noticed an ambulance parked near her building. Climbing to her floor, she entered her apartment and was horrified by what she saw. Her mother lay on a medical stretcher. Her deathly pale face was covered in cold sweat, and a pool of blood was visible on the floor. A young doctor adjusted the floor, while an older one with a tense expression spoke on the phone. "What happened?" Melissa whispered in fear, kneeling beside the stretcher. "Mom, my dear, what happened to you? Your mother has uterine bleeding. We need to rush her to the hospital." The doctor responded. Melissa made a quick decision and said, "I'll go with you to the hospital. I won't let her go without me." The doctor, in a hurry, nervously exclaimed, "No, relatives cannot travel in an ambulance. It's against the protocol." Melissa, deeply concerned for her mother, insisted, "Please, I beg you. I won't distract you." "Fine, or else we'll waste more time arguing. Let's go." The doctor agreed, glancing into the girl's eyes. In the hospital, Melissa was given a white coat and allowed to wait in the corridor. Later, near the operating room, the hustle and bustle began. No one paid attention to Melissa, but she overheard a conversation between rushing doctors. A 45-year-old woman, placental abruption, severe bleeding. The elderly head of the department asked a passing young midwife, "Have the anesthesiologists been informed?" "Yes, they have," the midwife replied. "They're talking about someone else, not my mom," the frightened girl said. After some time, a tired-looking doctor emerged from the operating room. Melissa was extremely anxious. "Are you Melissa? Are you her daughter?" the doctor asked softly. "Yes, it's me," she exhaled, fearfully awaiting the medical conclusion. The man compassionately placed his hand on Melissa's shoulder. "Hold on, Melissa. We did everything we could, but it was already too late. Your mother passed away," he said, and fell silent, allowing her to grasp the sad news. Then continued, "But we managed to save the baby, and now you have a brother." It seemed like the girl had been struck on the head with something heavy and soft at the same time. Her vision darkened, and breathing became difficult. Time and space ceased to exist for her. "Mom, my poor mom." Huge tears rolled down her cheeks. "Are you feeling unwell?" asked a woman in a white coat. Melissa exhaled and replied, "No, I feel fine. Thank you." A decision had to be made, and something needed to be done next. How? What should I do next? The girl asked herself, unsure of what steps to take. An elderly nurse approached her and said, "You need to come here with your father." "We don't have a father," Melissa whispered, feeling lost. "Do you have a grandmother or other relatives?" The girl shook her head negatively. "I only have a younger brother and sister." The compassionate woman sat down next to the girl and said softly, You'll need to collect your mom's body from the morgue and arrange a funeral. Body? Melissa asked, startled by the word. This is my mom who loved me, who sang songs to me in childhood, comforted me with warm hugs when I cried. The nurse felt deeply sorry for the orphan and tried to help her as best she could. You need to leave the hospital, walk down the street, then turn into the arch and enter the courtyard. There you'll see a company that handles funeral services. When you go in, they'll tell you what to do next. What about the child? When can I bring him home? The girl asked. How old are you now? The woman asked, looking at her attentively. I'm 17 now, Melissa said slowly, beginning to understand the purpose of the question. Who will give him to you? Sighed the nurse, shaking her head sadly. Your brother will likely go to an orphanage. When I turn 18, can I take my brother then? The girl asked hopefully, with sadness in her eyes. I think not. Very young children are usually adopted quickly. You better think about yourself. Most likely, you'll both end up in an orphanage. The cruel but honest answer frightened the girl. Facing such news, she felt scared because, in reality, no one would bother to understand that the children in the family had long been independent, and Melissa was ready to work hard just to keep them together. We're not alone. Our neighbors help us, the girl tried to explain. The nurse shrugged and fell silent. At the funeral bureau, they promised to take care of everything and provided a huge bill for payment. Melissa couldn't bring herself to stand up upon seeing that amount. On the way back home, Melissa couldn't figure out how to break this sad news to little Olivia and sensitive Kevin. She didn't even notice when she entered the apartment. The neighbor was already waiting for the girl. How is your mom feeling? She asked. Melissa understood that now she would have to say it out loud for the first time. She took a deep breath and whispered with trembling lips. Mom has passed away. How could such a thing happen? The woman sympathetically asked. The girl lowered her eyes. She didn't want to go into details. She remembered the upcoming funeral and handed the neighbor the bill. Aunt Kelly, can you help us? I only have half the amount. I was saving up for graduation. I promise I'll pay you back later. Of course, I'll help, the woman said, taking the paper in her hands. At the doorway of the apartment, the joyful Olivia greeted her sister, embracing her with both hands. She pressed against Melissa and shouted, "Hooray, Melissa's home." Kevin peeked out from the room with a textbook in his hand. Were you in the hospital? He asked. Suddenly, he froze, seeing the expression on his older sister's face. What happened to Mom? Yes, I was in the hospital. She slowly walked into the kitchen and collapsed wearily onto a chair. She felt the weight on her shoulders, but surprisingly, everything in her mind became clear. The children followed her into the kitchen. Olivia looked at her sister with her huge eyes, not understanding why her beloved Melissa looked strange, and Kevin anxiously awaited an answer. Where's our mom? Olivia asked carelessly. Melissa closed her eyes for a moment and sighed heavily. Olivia, our mom is no more, came the unusually quiet, tired voice of her sister. The prematurely matured Kevin held his breath, understanding everything correctly. What do you mean, no more, Mom? The little girl asked in surprise. Did she go somewhere? She flew to the sky, Melissa replied. The girl remembered a scene from some movie where a little character was explained about the death of parents in the same way. Did she fly to the moon? When will she come back to us? Curious Olivia asked. She won't come back to us, but she'll always watch over us from the sky, and we'll live together harmoniously, Melissa explained. Olivia's childish behavior helped her older sister calm down. Now she was responsible for the fate of her sister and brother. She tried to hug both children, but Kevin broke free and rushed into his room. The older sister understood that it was better not to disturb him now. Let him be alone with his thoughts. A little later, she entered his room. The boy lying on the bed tried to hide his tear-streaked face from his sister. Melissa lay down next to him and hugged her brother, just like in their childhood when she whispered bedtime stories to him. Kevin, It hurts a lot for me now too, but I have you and Olivia. We're a family, and we'll get through this together. Okay, she whispered to her brother. The younger sister ran into their room confidently and said, I want to be with you. She climbed onto the bed and settled between them. Kevin didn't mind. So, the three of them lay, embraced, until nightfall. Melissa told them old tales, and the night light cast whimsical shadows on the walls and ceiling. It seemed like they had entered some unfamiliar world where frightening uncertainty awaited them, and only together could they overcome all the obstacles ahead. The next day, Aunt Kelly quickly went to the funeral bureau, and the bill for their services was reduced by almost half. Melissa didn't mind. She just wanted the farewell to her mom to go as it should. And in a day, everything was ready. The funeral was quite modest. None of the many men who constantly drank with the woman showed up, perhaps unaware of her death. Only a few neighbors, Kevin and Melissa in a large black scarf that Aunt Kelly gave her, came to the church funeral. They decided not to bring Olivia to avoid traumatizing her psyche, and took the little girl to daycare. The neighbors sincerely sympathized with the children, even though they had not interacted with the deceased woman during her lifetime. They gathered a small sum of money, just enough to cover the remaining cost of funeral services. In the casket, their mom looked much better than she did in life. Melissa couldn't recall seeing such a serene expression on her face in a long time. It seemed as if, in the next moment, she would open her eyes and wonder why she was lying in a coffin. This absurd thought lingered in the girl's mind, making it challenging to cope with her emotions. Tears streamed down her cheeks continuously, all the way to the cemetery. Only when, after the farewell, the coffin was lowered into the grave and the men began to fill it with earth, did it become a bit easier for the girl. Or perhaps at that moment, she simply had no more tears. Afterward, the people who came to the funeral started to disperse. The children, embracing, silently lingered at their mom's grave for a long time. The relationships between the children improved even more after their mom's death, with each knowing their responsibilities in the house. Kevin, on his way to school, dropped his younger sister off at daycare, picked her up on the way back, attempted to prepare something in the kitchen, tidied up the apartment as best as he could, and did his homework in the evening. Melissa tried to attend school classes to avoid being expelled from the graduating class. After lunch, she rushed to clean the hallways of neighboring buildings since she was denied work at the university. Even Olivia stopped being capricious in the mornings and helped around the house. The thought of the unknown little brother was constantly on Melissa's mind. Where is he now? And what happened to him? She wondered. Soon Melissa would finish school, and then a little more time would pass until her birthday. And then she could start looking for the baby. Just wait for me. I will definitely find you, she thought wistfully every night before sleep. Kelly started coming to their home almost every day. She went through all the rooms, looked into closets and the fridge, calling it caring for the orphans. The neighbor planned to use their spacious 3-room apartment for her own purposes. After all, the children would be sent to an orphanage anyway. Not long ago, her son decided to get married and brought his fiancée into their small apartment. She was pleased with the opportunity to provide the newlyweds with a spacious apartment along with furniture. However, as time passed, the situation with the neighbor's housing remained unchanged. The older daughter of the deceased woman had already finished school and received her diploma, but the guardianship authorities seemed to have forgotten about the children. So, the neighbor decided to take matters into her own hands. One evening, after cleaning another staircase and returning home, Melissa discovered 2 unfamiliar women in her apartment. The brunette with a short haircut in a dark suit, wearing glasses with thick lenses on the bridge of her nose, was writing something while sitting at the table. The other woman, a blonde in a mustard-colored jacket over a black knit dress, stood in front of Olivia and Kevin, who sat fearfully on the couch. It was evident that she was trying to convey something to them. Melissa is here, and we've been waiting for you. exclaimed the blonde woman. The warmth and friendliness in her voice contradicted her formal appearance. "My name is Monica, and this is Karen." The woman at the table looked at the girl and said, "We represent the Child Protective Services." Melissa already understood this and understood why they came here, but she hoped that everything would be resolved favorably. "We received information about 3 minors living here without adult supervision," the woman continued. "In 6 months, I'll be 18. The girl hurried to clarify. "Melissa, by law, you are still a child for a few more months. A tragedy has occurred in your family, and the state is taking custody of you. We are here to help you," the woman explained gently but firmly. "Pack your things and gather the younger children, but we are managing. Our house is clean, and we have all the necessary things," Melissa said, trying to prove their competence. The woman condescendingly shook her head and bluntly said, "Pack your things. There's nothing to discuss here. You can't take us from the apartment right now. This evening." Melissa cried out, becoming nervous out of desperation. "We are obligated to do so," the woman calmly replied, adding, "Please, don't force us to call for assistance and use force against you. It will only frighten the younger children." Melissa gathered everything necessary, and the three often set off to an unknown place. For several days, they stayed in a small house, along with about 10 other children. The caregivers placed them in a separate room, provided delicious meals, and did not interfere with their activities. Kevin and Olivia stayed close to Melissa. They were focused but calm. The girl had come to terms with the situation, resolving that they could peacefully wait for her to come of age, as long as they weren't separated. Later, it turned out that they were only waiting for distribution to different shelters. 3 days later, a car with social workers arrived for Olivia and Kevin. The older girl had to go to another shelter. The older sister was deeply upset, hearing the younger sister cry. Melissa kissed Olivia goodbye and, through tears, promised that she would find and take them out of the shelter very soon. Kevin silently endured the separation, only saying to his older sister as he got into the car, "We'll be waiting for you." In her new surroundings, feeling empty and indifferent to her environment, Melissa spent several days sitting on the bed in the girl's bedroom. The other residents, they showed no interest in the new girl. In this shelter, many children lacked mutual respect, and there were their own rules. Several girls, Melissa's age, bullied and took everything from the younger kids. Watching these situations, Melissa imagined that it could have been her brother and sister. One day, she couldn't tolerate the mistreatment of a younger child and stepped in to defend them. This drew the anger of the other residents. Initially, they played pranks like putting dead mice in her drawer or ruining her food in the cafeteria. However, one late evening, they cornered her and started making threats. "If you don't bring us a couple $100 tomorrow, you'll regret it." Melissa realized that living here wouldn't be normal, and complaining to the caregivers would be futile, only worsening her situation. The next day, she escaped from the shelter. It happened spontaneously. She simply worked out, dressed as she was, through the gate someone forgot to close. In her pocket, she had an old button phone inherited from her mom and a small amount of money she hadn't surrendered upon entering the shelter. 50 meters from the gate, she saw a bus stop. At that moment, a white shuttle bus arrived, and she impulsively decided to board it. The bus ride seemed endless to her, heading somewhere far beyond the city. Melissa didn't know what to do next. The joy of unexpected freedom gave way to uncertainty about the correctness of her actions. When the charming houses with colorful roofs surrounded by greenery disappeared, replaced by old multi-story buildings, the bus reached its final stop. "Last stop," announced the driver loudly. All passengers got off, and the bus turned and left. Melissa found herself on the outskirts of the city. The unfamiliar surroundings frightened and unsettled her, but she didn't want to return to the shelter. Going back home was also impossible, as Child Protective Services would be searching for her there, and she had no doubt about her Aunt Kelly's intentions. The girl noticed a road sign before exiting the highway, indicating a small town nearby that she had heard about. Sometimes, sounds, images, or conversations accidentally seen and heard in the past resurface in memory. It was precisely at that moment when the girl recalled a conversation between two grandmothers she overheard last year while passing by her apartment building. "It's a shame I can't tend to the country house anymore. Ever since my husband passed away, I haven't been there once, and it's been 3 years now. There's such a nice house with a small plot of land where water is already set up. Have you heard of such a town? The last house with a blue roof and blue windows. It's the only one like that." The girl decided to settle in that house and live there until she reached adulthood. Melissa took out the money from her pocket and counted it. She realized that she urgently needed to find a job. 15 minutes of walking on the edge of a small grove, and the girl saw the neighbor's blue house. Melissa pushed the door to enter the property, and with a creak, it swung open. She immediately noticed the neglected small plot and an old house. The path leading to it was overgrown with tall grass, and the dusty, sun-faded wooden windows were entwined with plants. The girl decided to knock on the door to check if anyone was in the house, but, of course, there was no response. The front door was locked, and after a brief thought, Melissa leaned toward the dirty doormat and lifted it, revealing a small silver key. She opened the door and entered the house, where the smell of dust and dampness was strong, making it difficult for her to see anything due to the darkness. Not expecting the light to work, Melissa pressed the switch on the wall to the right of the entrance. To her surprise, a dim light bulb under the low ceiling flickered to life. This inspired her to take further action. The old house consisted of one room and a kitchen. It had everything necessary for modest living: 2 old metal beds, a table, chairs, and various utensils. In the bedroom stood a dusty bookshelf. Apparently, the neighbor's husband enjoyed reading books. Melissa easily opened the curtains, allowing the sunlight to fill the house, creating a certain atmosphere. Cleaning the house took the entire day. Tired but satisfied, Melissa sat on the wooden porch, still warm from the day's sun. Sad thoughts started returning to her. She remembered her brother's farewell gaze and the tearful face of her little sister. The older sister still didn't understand how she would reunite the family, but she vowed to herself that she would do whatever it took. The girl tried to find a job, but the internet in this house worked slowly, and without sleep or rest, Melissa searched for ads in all available sources. There were almost no job listings that accepted workers without proper documents. So, the girl decided to offer her services as a caregiver in the free services section of the classified ads. Surprisingly, the next day brought a phone call. "Melissa. Hello. I'm calling about your ad. My name is Deborah. Are you still looking for a caregiver job?" asked the woman cheerfully. "Yes, I am, but I live far from the city," the girl quickly clarified. "Fantastic," unexpectedly exclaimed Deborah. "Would you like to work right at your own home? My husband is bedridden, and he has wanted to move to a small town for a long time." She continued, "I will pay a decent salary and even offer extra if needed." After thinking for a moment, Melissa agreed to the offer. "Give me your address. I'll come to meet you," the young woman demanded. About 3 hours later, a red Jeep stopped in front of the house. Deborah looked stunning. A fiery brunette around 25 in tight pants and a red blouse, like a beauty salon advertisement. Her black hair extensions, silicone lips, and unnaturally long eyelashes portrayed someone who took great care of her appearance. In contrast, Melissa's simple appearance, lack of makeup, and dark brown hair braided into a ponytail satisfied the young woman. According to her opinion, a caregiver should look just like that. Deborah, fearing to get dirty, disdainfully peered into the old house. "Excellent. This is what we need," she muttered, surprising the future caregiver. Melissa's attempts to clarify the husband's illness and his care preferences yielded no results. The stylish woman just smirked and replied, "Why are you so worried? You'll meet him tomorrow, and you can discuss everything together." In the morning, a specialized vehicle arrived, and two sturdy medical workers carried the invalid into the house on a stretcher. Placing a small bag with his belongings on the porch, they immediately left without saying a word to the girl. Melissa was left alone with an unknown man in a foreign house. The new tenant appeared to be around 40 externally. Perhaps the additional years on the man's face were due to an unkempt beard and the exhaustion from the pain he endured. It was clear that the chestnut-colored thick hair had not been trimmed by a barber for a long time, and the man's gray, melancholic eyes gazed indifferently at the ceiling. "My name is Melissa." The girl decided to introduce herself right away, offering a friendly smile. The guest reluctantly turned his head and stared at the caregiver for a while. He hadn't expected to see such a fragile young girl. Her long dark brown hair was neatly tied in a ponytail. A slightly upturned nose, plump lips, and sincere blue eyes displayed her kindness. A very young girl. What can she do to help me? He thought, and then hoarsely introduced himself. "I'm Frederick. Pleasure to meet you. Your wife hired me for the job, but unfortunately, she didn't tell me anything about you," Melissa said. "That's not surprising," he chuckled. "She doesn't know anything about me and doesn't want to know now." Melissa tried to imagine how it feels to go from being a healthy person to suddenly becoming helpless and dependent on others. She felt sorry for Frederick, sat down at his bedside, and asked, "Could you tell me what happened to you?" The childlike directness and naivety surprised the man. No one had been interested in his well-being for a long time. Suddenly, he felt the desire to finally share his inner feelings with someone. For many years, Frederick owned a successful construction business. While developing his business, he had no time to start a family. However, about 2 years ago, his parents passed away, and the man began to feel lonely. The vast house became empty, and Frederick didn't want to return there. Nobody welcomed him. Only the loud echo of his steps and the soft rustle of curtains swaying in the draft. But the dream of creating a strong, close-knit family remained with him. Soon after his friend's birthday, he met Deborah. Friends had repeatedly warned the businessman about impulsive actions, saying she was a very cunning woman. Still, he didn't listen because this brunette constantly sought Frederick's attention. It took a short time from their first meeting to the wedding. However, after the wedding, their love gradually began to fade. Deborah was not a domestic wife. She didn't want to have children and wasn't interested in spending time at home alone with her husband. She preferred nightclubs, parties, and shopping sprees. Returning home after a hard day's work to an empty house and reheating a dry pizza from the nearest cafe, Frederick couldn't understand why he had married her. Family relationships worsened, and a few months ago, the man decided to talk about divorce. His wife fervently promised to change so as not to part with Frederick. For a while, she sat quietly at home, tried to cook something for her husband, and attempted to smile sincerely. She often locked herself in the bathroom, talking on the phone for a long time, confident that her husband wouldn't notice. The spouses continued to drift apart. 2 months ago, an unexpected tragedy struck. Frederick was robbed and severely beaten on the stairs of his own office. Doctors managed to save him, but the spinal cord injury left him disabled. His body became almost uncontrollable, and the few movements he could make required enormous effort and caused excruciating pain. Doctors said the consequences of the injury might last a lifetime. The attackers were never found. It turned out that the surveillance cameras were disabled that day, and there were no witnesses. His wife visited the hospital only twice, mainly to discuss the future of her husband's business. Employees complained about Deborah and her blatant interference in her husband's affairs. She couldn't take over the business because the construction industry proved too complex for her. The company survived solely on past projects, but Frederick lost interest in everything. He fell into depression and saw no more purpose in his existence. It seemed to him that the world was completely shattered. Even after returning home last week, things did not get easier for him. Deborah falsely smiled, constantly trying to convince her husband to sell the business before it was too late. Besides, the young woman almost no longer had her calls from her lover. Frederick found it physically unpleasant to be in the same house with her. He was ready to go anywhere, and he immediately agreed to the suggestion of moving out of town. He didn't care anymore. He thought he was going there to die. "You'll feel better in nature, and there will be a caregiver to look after you," his wife said, seeing him off. "Once I sell the business, I'll come to you immediately. I think we should sell the house too. Why do we need this 3-story mansion now?" she reasoned. Frederick remained silent. His aversion to his wife prevented him from saying anything to her. Melissa was shocked by the story, and she wanted to help him in some way, but she didn't know how. "If you want, I can cook something for you," the girl offered. For the first time, Frederick smiled sincerely, feeling much better after sharing his story with her. "I want macaroni with sausages." That's how they started living together. Melissa took care of the man, cooked for him, bathed him, and did the laundry. Frederick tried to ease the work for his dear caregiver and exerted enormous effort to move around the house with the help of a crutch. He managed to take a few steps, leaning on the crutch, although each movement caused unbearable pain. Yet, he wasn't going to give up, as he didn't want to appear useless and helpless in Melissa's eyes. Frederick liked the amazing girl, but he didn't know yet how to feel about this emotion. In the evenings, she lit candles because the small light bulb didn't illuminate the entire house, and she read him old books left by the previous owner. Then they would talk for a long time about various topics, even about space and dinosaurs. The businessman shared stories about the countries he had visited. When conversation topics ran out, they would simply sit in silence, watching the funny shadows dancing on the walls from the candle flames. A spiritual closeness developed between them, growing stronger each day. The girl admired this strong, intelligent man. He inspired trust in her. One evening, she decided to share her sad story. Frederick remained silent for a long time after hearing it, digesting the information. Then he simply said, "Don't worry, everything will be okay." And for some reason, the girl believed him. She suddenly realized that she had long been in love with this man. Their tragic destinies united two lonely, weary souls. After some time, Deborah arrived with her usual glamorous appearance, bringing along a young woman who was completely opposite to her in appearance. She was very short, dressed in a black, buttoned-up business suit, with a short haircut and a large leather portfolio in her hands. "This is a notary," Deborah said to the caregiver, meeting her at the door. Her determined, cunning eyes anticipated the moment when she would finally get what she wanted. "Frederick, you look great," Deborah said with feigned enthusiasm, seeing Frederick sitting in bed. She couldn't hide her unpleasant surprise and irritation. "Meet Irma. She will help us reorganize the documents for your company." "What documents?" Frederick asked in surprise, pretending not to understand what Deborah was talking about. "Well, what documents? We discussed this, didn't we?" the unfaithful wife said tenderly. "You promised to transfer your business and the house to me, and I would sell them profitably, move in with you, and we would live happily ever after. I didn't agree to anything with you, and I'm not going to sign anything." The calmness of the husband greatly annoyed the cunning wife. "Frederick, we discussed this. Remember, I arranged everything, even brought a notary to you. You just need to put your signature on the papers," Deborah continued, trying to persuade the stubborn husband. "There will be no deals," the man replied firmly and lay back on the pillow. Talking to Deborah made him feel worse. He had a severe headache. "You don't need anything else. You will rot in bed for the rest of your days. And I am a young woman. I still have my whole life ahead," the wife shouted, unable to contain her emotions. "I've said it all." The husband closed his eyes, wishing Deborah would leave his temporary home as soon as possible. The wife looked questioningly at the notary, but she only shook her head negatively. Biting her lip, the wife tried to justify her behavior and said, "Frederick, I'm sorry. I'm just very worried about you, so I'm nervous. Rest, dear, rest. I'll come later." After that, the wife and the notary left the house. But before leaving, Deborah approached Melissa very closely and, leaning toward her, whispered, "Melissa, listen. I probably forgot to explain when I hired you. My husband's condition is deteriorating. The doctor said there's no help for him. You don't need to take care of him so much. Just feed him broth once a day, and I'll pay you more later. A lot more." She looked significantly into the girl's bright eyes, hoping she understood what Deborah was hinting at, and she drove away to the city in her luxurious car. Melissa was uncomfortable hearing such instructions. She understood that Frederick shouldn't be agitated, especially considering how poorly he felt after the unexpected visit of guests. The room still smelled of Deborah's expensive, sickeningly sweet perfumes. Melissa opened the window wide, sat on the edge of the bed, and placed her palm on his forehead. The man opened his eyes. He felt a bit better. "Melissa, I'm so glad I have you now," he whispered with tenderness in his voice, gently squeezing her slender hand in his, bringing it slowly to his lips, and giving her a tender kiss. The girl smiled softly and said quietly, "Let's have some tea." The next day, Melissa needed to buy groceries at a small local store. Next to it was a beautiful two-story house made of white brick with emerald green shingles. Various cars were always parked near the gate, and sometimes ordinary people stood in line, some of them using crutches. In the store, Melissa decided to inquire why there were always many people near that house. "Harold lives there. He's a chiropractor and just a kind person," replied the cashier. "Many people come to him. Recently, he helped a man with a long-standing back problem, and now he feels great." The woman continued praising him as she packed sugar into bags. "Probably. It's expensive?" Melissa timidly asked. "No. Harold never refuses anyone. He has his principles, and people thank him however they can. Some bring him groceries, while wealthy people give money. They say one businessman even tried to give him a car, but he refused such a generous gift. Harold healed the man's son after an accident." After paying for the groceries, Melissa went outside and waited for all of the doctor's patients to disperse. She couldn't help but hope that this man could help Frederick recover. 2 hours after the last patient was taken away in a white car, the girl decisively pressed the doorbell at the courtyard entrance. Almost immediately, a tall man around 60 with dark eyes and a crooked nose emerged. He was dressed in a loose-fitting, light gray outfit resembling surgical attire. The man had enormous hands. The girl thought they could easily bend a horseshoe. "Hello. Are you Harold?" Melissa asked with excitement. "Yes, I'm Harold. What happened?" He smirked, and his almost black, piercing eyes observed the stranger from beneath bushy eyebrows. "A 35-year-old man with neck and head injuries." Melissa tried to be concise, not to distract the doctor. "Bring him to my place tomorrow after 9 in the morning," he reassured. "We live nearby, on the adjacent street. The last blue house," the girl hurriedly added with hope in her large eyes. Harold reacted positively to what he heard. "All right, I'll come by tomorrow evening," the man replied shortly and headed home. Around 7 in the evening, when the sun was setting, Harold came to them. With familiar movements and a serious expression, he carefully examined the new patient's entire body. He started with the neck and head, then skillfully felt the spine with sensitive fingers. He was utterly focused. Suddenly, Frederick screamed, "Does it hurt here? And here?" He continued the diagnosis. The patient groaned and moaned when certain areas were pressed. Melissa, frightened, sat in the corner. Each cry of pain from Frederick was felt by the girl, and her heart nervously fluttered in her chest. "It might be too late," Harold whispered quietly. "When did the injury occur?" 3 months ago. "I see." The guest carefully examined the patient and unexpectedly asked seriously, "Do you want to live?" "Yes, I want to live," Frederick replied just as seriously. It seemed like the men understood each other. "This injury is very serious. It will take a lot of time to treat. Melissa, go outside and take a walk," he instructed the girl. The girl listened and left her house onto the street. She was very anxious, so she didn't feel like going for a walk at all. "Let it work, Lord," she silently prayed. The girl stood there nervously near a broken fence until Harold approached her. He looked very tired, his shirt wet with sweat. "I'll come to you at the same time tomorrow," he said, and slowly headed home. Within a week of starting the treatment, noticeable improvements appeared. The body became more obedient. The pain practically disappeared. And with a cane in hand, Frederick could cover more distance. He no longer felt pain with every step or movement. Frederick could now descend stairs independently and venture outside, slowly but confidently making his way to the doctor's treatment sessions. Initially deemed impossible, Harold insisted on a consistent load. Frederick had to reintroduce himself to daily exercises, which he had neglected while engrossed in his business. Melissa never left the recovering man's side. Every morning, she took care of household chores, and in the evenings, they enjoyed long-awaited walks to Harold. Returning home late, they held hands, admired the sunset, chatted cheerfully, tired but happy. Frederick felt confident. He had long decided on his business and his wife, and he began making work calls to stay updated on everything. Over time, he devised a plan. Feeling strong enough, the businessman called a taxi and went to his office. His wife's car was conveniently parked in the office lot. Delighted employees surrounded their boss, eager to shake his hand. "Frederick, we're glad to see you. You look fantastic." Colleagues sincerely rejoiced. He entered his office without knocking. Deborah was at the desk sorting through documents, various papers scattered around. "What's going on?" she rudely asked. But as she raised her head, her arrogant, displeased look turned into surprise and a fake smile. "Hello, Deborah," greeted her husband, swiftly entering the office, leaning a bit on his cane. The wife rose from the table, contemplating her next moves. She looked as glamorous as ever, wearing a white blouse unbuttoned at the top 2 buttons, a black leather-fitted skirt, high-heeled patent leather shoes, and bold makeup completing her look. However, a sense of unease appeared in her dark eyes. "Frederick, I'm so glad to see you. The countryside life has done wonders for you, and it's all thanks to me," she exclaimed, attempting to embrace him. "Of course, thanks to you," he smirked, stepping away. "What are you trying to find here?" "Frederick, I'm trying to save our business. Look, I'm going through the documents," she said with a faint smile. "Our business?" He chuckled, walking behind the desk and taking a seat. "You don't have to worry about it anymore. I'm freeing you from it and taking over the business myself." The young woman quickly grasped the situation and tried to explain it differently to her husband. "Frederick, I've been working here for several months now, every day, while you've been enjoying the outdoors," she confidently stated, pouting her full lips in offense. "I know, Deborah, what you've been up to day and night. So, pack your things from the house, and we'll see each other in court. I've finally met the woman I've been dreaming of my whole life. She saved me and helped me heal," he declared. Frederick sighed in relief, finally saying what he had needed to tell Deborah for a long time. The stylish brunette blushed, realizing she had no place here anymore. "Well, no, you won't get rid of me that easily," she thought angrily and stormed out of the office, slamming the door loudly. Office colleagues likely guessed what happened in the boss's office. They whispered approvingly and laughed as they saw her leaving, further infuriating Deborah. Nothing went as planned, all because of that caretaker. Unable to contain her anger, she got into her car, grabbed her phone, and dialed the caretaker's number. "You ungrateful caretaker," she screamed into the phone instead of a greeting. "Who asked you to help him? I've practically done everything, convinced his lover and friend to attack him, negotiated the sale of his business. You ruined everything for me, she yelled in frustration. Having calmed down a bit, she realized she had shared unnecessary information with the caretaker and hung up. Melissa turned off the call recording and immediately forwarded it to Frederick, as they had agreed. He had no doubt about who was responsible for his misfortune. Knowing his wife's emotional nature, he needed to provoke her to gather evidence. They handed over the information to the police station, and an investigation and court proceedings were set to follow. The experienced businessman quickly re-established his work processes. Luckily, before it was too late, he moved Melissa to his mansion and proposed to her, as she had turned 18. With the help of Frederick's connections, they swiftly located her younger brother and sister. The trip to the shelter seemed to take forever. Finally, Melissa would be able to see her family. Olivia and Kevin were already waiting for her in the corridor, accompanied by a young caretaker. Seeing her long-awaited sister, the children quickly ran to her. Olivia, out of habit, tightly embraced the girl, and the boy hugged her neck, resting his head on her shoulder. Kevin, Olivia, I'm so glad to see you, the girl said, tears streaming down her cheeks. Even the younger sister was crying, unable to say a word. Even her brother, who had grown and matured in the past 6 months, didn't try to hide his teary eyes. It was impossible to remain indifferent to this sincere reunion. Even the shelter worker wiped tears from her face with a handkerchief, and Frederick smiled joyfully. Another problem needed to be solved, so the newlyweds went to the address where Melissa's family used to live. Relatives of the former neighbor now occupied the apartment. Aunt Kelly, during this time, had visited numerous notaries and even found real estate agents operating illegally. They promised to help legalize the stolen property, but Melissa and Frederick arrived in time. The neighbor couldn't accept that the apartment wouldn't be hers. They had to turn to the police station to evict the audacious occupants from the children's apartment. In Frederick's enormous house, originally built for a large, happy family, the sound of children's laughter echoed after many years, bringing warmth and love. Christmas was approaching, and the entire family actively prepared for the celebration. Frederick brought a huge Christmas tree and, with Kevin's help, set it up in the spacious living room by the fireplace. Everyone decorated the tree together with colorful balls, sparkling icicles, and shimmering garlands. They planned the festive menu, ordered gifts, made wishes, laughed, and simply spent time as a family. Melissa couldn't stop thinking about one thing: the youngest brother who survived their mother's death. Where was he now? What happened to him? Feeling the emotions of his beloved wife, Frederick, without saying a word, began gathering information about the child. One day, returning from work, he placed documents on the table. The young wife looked at him in surprise. His name is Jason. He's in this shelter. Not adopted yet, but potential parents have recently appeared, and authorities are currently evaluating them, he said. Melissa grabbed the documents, quickly flipping through them. Her lips trembled. Tears fell onto the printed words on the paper. Jason, how I wish to see you, the girl whispered. Melissa felt tender emotions for her unknown brother, the little boy. After shedding a few tears, she gratefully embraced her husband and said, "Thank you, my dear husband." However, she hesitated to ask him the crucial question of whether they could bring him into their home. Frederick understood without words and assured her, "It will be challenging, but I promise you I'll do everything possible and impossible to bring him to us." And Melissa believed Frederick. She always had. "Thank you. I love you so much." Now she knew exactly what she would wish for at Christmas. Melissa snapped out of these memories. Birds had already had their breakfast and flown off to their bar business. Children played in the yard, enjoying the cool weather and the weekend. Olivia, in a white jacket and a matching furry hat with pink cheeks, looked like an adorable creature. The girl's French bulldog, dressed in a small doggy coat, ran and snorted nearby. Together, They built a huge tent from tree branches. The happy squeals of the girl and the barks of the dog echoed throughout the yard. The more serious and reserved Kevin rollerbladed nearby. Sitting on the rails, a big orange cat watched it all, unwilling to join to avoid dirtying its paws. Melissa moved away from the window and leaned over the children's bed where Jason peacefully slept. He was so small and endearing. He had returned to his family not long ago, and it felt like he had never left. Suddenly, Melissa clutched her stomach, feeling a movement roughly around her diaphragm. She knew that life was budding within her. Another little person,